grew up here in the Zimmerman area, Elk River area, didn't you?
Yeah, right here, 3/4 of a mile north of here,
Uh-huh.
my dad and mother's farm.
Well, tell us about those early years.
Well, see, I was born in 1929, so, and the Depression really, the hard times really hit in about 35 and 36. That's when we had all that ungodly hot weather. I can remember it being in the 90s in April. And then as a kid, we had what they call a stone boat. That's 2 logs with some boards on the top. And we had a pump, we pumped water by hand. And every evening then when the sun went down, we'd fill them barrels up and the horse would take us out to the fields and we would water the corn. We'd put on like maybe a half a gallon of water on each stalk. And then we'd do that till, 10, 11 o'clock at night. And that was every day. Every day we did that during the summer. And as far as having fun, Sunday was always a glorious day because nobody worked on Sundays. You went to church in the morning and come home and you had your day off. That was the only day of the week you had off. You had that off. So we'd go back to the river. It was about 2 miles. And we'd walk back there and go swimming and fishing and that was in the summertime. And in the wintertime, we had some hills behind our place. We'd go sledding and ice skating. And we had, we had neighbors, and all the neighbors always got along. You worked together and you played together, And so we had a wonderful time playing after the work was done.
Yeah.
But everybody was in the same boat. You worked and then you played, and that was. And I know people that are a little older than I am talk about what a terrible time it was, during the Depression. And myself, I didn't know that it was a bad time. I didn't know that we were having such a terrible time because we had food on the table. We always had a big garden. We had hogs to butcher. We had milk cows, so we had homemade butter. A big garden, So, and then I know in the fall of the year, my folks used to go up north berry picking. They always went berry picking. And then my grandparents had a great big orchard, so we had a lot of applesauce. And we always had small fruit trees like currants and stuff like that. My mother made jelly and jam, and so we always didn't have what we wanted to eat, but we had enough to eat. But, as you look back on it, it was hard, but we didn't know it was hard. We didn't.
Dan, I'd like to ask a question. We're in a discussion last night about moonshining. Was there any moonshining going on around here when you were a kid?
My dad made moonshine till he got caught. And of course he knew who turned him in, one of his best buyers that he wouldn't sell to because he didn't have a quarter for a quart of whiskey. And the feds come out to the house and they broke up the still. But of course my dad knew ahead of time that they were coming because we had a sheriff in this county that knew that these guys were making moonshine and that's the only way they had to make money.
Yeah.
And he never turned them in. And so my dad was notified ahead of time that the feds were coming. And all the whiskey was well hidden. It was never found. But then he never made any after that. That was the end of it. They broke up the still and he never made any more. And another thing, I read just about anything I can get my hands on. I'm always reading,
What kind of things do you like to read?
everything. I like to read mechanics magazines, but I like to read everything. I like to read short stories and mystery books and yeah, I read everything. And well, I get the paper in the morning and I read first half an hour while everything's warming up in here, I read the paper, you know. But
Well, how about when you're just a little kid learning how to read? Did reading come easy for you or
Yeah.
difficult? It came easy.
yeah. One thing, two things that came easy for me was reading and math and spelling. I can remember when my kids were going to high school and they'd have trouble spelling. But see, we learned spelling with phonics. And, but if you know phonics, you can spell anything. And I remember my kids always asking me, how do you spell this, how do you spell that? You know, I could always spell for them. But I love school.
Well, how about as a little kid, did you show special interest in figuring out how things worked or taking things
I think
apart?
I did. My older siblings always tell me I was always taking stuff apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. If something needed fixed, they brought it to me and I fixed it. Yeah.
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 Well, you probably had just some kind of a natural knack
I
for
think so.
understanding things.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah. And everything always interested me, and if I couldn't figure it out, I was never afraid to ask somebody. You know, like even here today, if I can't figure out a problem, I'll call around to different people that I know have worked on things like that. You know, and
Sure.
and I've had a lot of people call me. In fact, I imagine I probably overhauled cars over the telephone. You know, they'll start working on their cars, you know, and they'll get stuck, and they'll call me, and I'll tell them because, boy, that's how I learned by asking questions.
Oh, yeah. Can you tell us about the businesses that were there along the railroad tracks back in the 30s, 40s, 50s?
Well, I can tell
60s?
you some, but you know, us kids didn't get uptown too much. You know, we had to work. About the only time that we would get uptown is once in a while we could there was a creamery in town, and the creamery took in cream Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And every once in a while, my dad would let us ride in with him to the creamery. And yeah, back when we first moved out on the farm was in 1929, and that's when the potato boom was going on in Sherburne County. And they had warehouses. I don't know how many they were, but there was warehouses all the way from this street, all the way down, 3/4 of the way down that street. And there was potato buyers here, and people bought potatoes in by the wagon load, you know, horse and wagon, and they bought every day. And of course the railroad went through town then, and when them cars get loaded, they had a sidetrack, and then we had a nice mill here at one time, a grain mill, you know, and that. It first burnt down in the late 30s, and it took them a pretty near year to rebuild that mill, and then it wasn't near as big as the first one, and there was only about, I would say, 10 years, and that one burned down. And they used to have a lot of mill fires because they didn't have the exhaust fans to take that dust out, you know, they just never thought of it, I guess. Well, then after the second one burnt down, then a fellow come in and he built a big one, a big mill. And that lasted for, I would suspect 30 years. And then that burned down. And they never rebuilt after that.
No.
Because it was getting so there was fewer and fewer farmers, you know, and it just, I think, wasn't profitable to put up another. But, you know, they, those days they sold, the mill, that's where they had the coal storage, they sold corn, you know, the millers sold corn, coal, and feed to the farmers and stuff. Yeah, and that was, on the east side of that street was all the potato warehouses and the coal warehouse and the mill. And on the other side was the blacksmith shop at that time, and, well, lumberyard first, and then the blacksmith shop. And then the lumberyard just moved up a little bit, and they had a big, where the laundromat is now.
Oh.
There was a big lumberyard, it was Hanson's that had the hardware store.
Oh, yes.
And they had the lumberyard,
Oh, yeah.
and that was where the laundromat is now. And then, of course, right on the corner here was a liquor store. That was a drugstore and hotel,
Uh-huh.
the White Squirrel Hotel. And the drugstore downstairs, and I think there was it was either 8 or 10 rooms, a hotel upstairs.
And it was called the White Squirrel Hotel?
White Squirrel.
Wait,
The
I
White
thought there
Squirrel
was
Hotel.
another name, I thought it was an H, or, the one that burned you're talking about? The
Yeah.
hotel that burned?
Yeah. Well, no,
Didn't they have another name for that too?
well, you're talking about the Buffalo House?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this was before the Buffalo House.
Yes.
That's the same building.
Yes.
But, see, before that, it was a liquor store.
Liquor store.
After Prohibition, well, then that was a liquor store.
Yes.
That wasn't a drugstore anymore. It was a liquor store, and then it wasn't a hotel anymore either. That was the people that owned the liquor store, that was their living quarters.
Yeah. I thought there was another name for that hotel. But maybe I remember wrong.
Well, I've got some pictures, and I'm almost positive it was the White Squirrel, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
It was a drugstore anyway till Prohibition was voted out, and then they got liquor. And,
Well, didn't Marty have it for a while, the sheriff?
well, before that, the first man in this town to have it as a liquor store was, his name was Kraus. Max Kraus, his name was. And he had it for quite a long time, and then he sold it to a party by the name of Sharping. Sharping had a beer joint in Princeton, and there was no liquor. They wouldn't allow liquor I know they wouldn't allow it in Princeton, and I think that whole county was dry, if I remember right. See, that would be Stearns County, ain't it, Princeton?
No, that is Black.
Black's County.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were dry. And so the guy, he had a beer joint, and so he bought the liquor store from Max Kraus. And then he didn't have it too long, and Marty owned a bowling alley in Princeton. And then he come down and he bought the building from Sharping. And then he was in here. Now this is kind of funny. When we moved up here, this whole area in here was Protestant, strong Protestants. We were the first Catholic family to move up here. And then when Max Kraus bought the liquor store, he was Catholic from Foley. And he wouldn't sell that liquor store to nobody unless they were Catholic.
Oh.
So he sold it to Sharping, and he was Catholic, and he sold it to Marty, and he was Catholic. But then, about that time, it was getting pretty integrated, you know, and religion didn't mean that much anymore. They weren't so separated, you know. But and then he sold it to Fred Schultz, and then he made it into the Buffalo House.
Yeah. It seems to me, didn't Marty own it when Ingemar Johansson took the championship? I remember all the Swedes and Norwegians from all around, they were celebrating at Marty's bar.
That could be. I think I was in the service at that time.
Oh. Tell us about the fire at the Buffalo House.
At the Buffalo House, that was, the first fire was on believe it was on Easter weekend, if I remember right. And the fire was terrible. The reason it was so terrible, there had been so many rooms, many additions and false ceilings, and of course the wiring was from way back when they first got electricity, in this country, in the 20s, and bare wires, and all these buildings had rodents in them, and they chewed the wires. I'm pretty sure that's where the fire started, but it was never determined really where the fire started. This was the first fire, and it didn't.
Excuse me, when was that first fire?
Before the second one.
Before Schultz had it.
No,